The subject of our discussion now is Didier Deschamps, who took charge of France in 2012 and is still in charge 14 years later. But we know that his spell is coming to an end. He will be replaced after the World Cup, almost certainly with Zinedine Zidane. But Deschamps obviously wants to go out on a high. We want to just assess a little bit his legacy. I think it's important to sort of note that the situation wasn't great when he joined it in 2012. It wasn't quite the nadir which was in 2010 in South Africa. Laurent Blanc got them playing some nice football, got some decent results before they went out of Euro 2012 in the quarterfinals against Spain. There was still a bit of trouble though in the dressing room, wasn't there, in Ukraine in 2012. Deschamps had a difficult start. I think we could say it had all kind of turned around in that World Cup playoff against Ukraine. That was the springboard when France were 2-0 down. They won 3-0 at the Stade de France, and the rest is history. He took them to the quarterfinals of the 2014 World Cup, the final of Euro 2016, when I think France probably should have beaten Portugal at the Stade de France, hitting the woodwork a couple of times before Eder scored that extra time goal. And of course, won the World Cup. So did it as a player, indeed as a captain, and now as a manager in 2018 when France won brilliantly in Russia. They reached the final again in 2022, losing on penalties. They won the Nations League in 2021. It's a pretty impressive CV as a France manager, Tom. Would you say he's one of the most consistently good international managers ever?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's France's greatest ever manager. And I think his legacy will be defined by the extent to which he turned France into serial contenders, because that had never been the case. You look at the history of the France national team, one incredible generation in the late 1950s, World Cup semi-finalists in 1958. Another incredible generation in the mid-1980s, led by Michel Platini, two-time World Cup semi-finalists, and winners of Euro 1984 on home soil. Apart from that, France had achieved nothing in international football until Deschamps came along as a player, first and foremost. And when you look at their World Cup record specifically, prior to France winning the World Cup in 1998 on home soil with Deschamps as captain, they'd gone 2 World Cups without even qualifying. So when France won the World Cup in 1998, it was their first appearance at the tournament since 1986. And then in the tournaments that followed that, there wasn't necessarily a sense of continuity. We know that 1998 was this massive, threshold, milestone in the history of French football. But although that team then went on to win Euro 2000 in arguably more impressive fashion, 2002, they crash out of the World Cup in the group phase. 2006, yes, they reached the final, but with Raymond Domenech as coach, and in a way that didn't particularly feel like it was very sustainable, very dependent on this incredible late coda to Zinedine Zidane's career. And at Euro 2008, everything explodes. Then things explode again at the 2010 World Cup. And since Deschamps has come in, there has just this been consistent sense that France will always qualify and France will always be in contention. Now, there is an asterisk, and the asterisk there is tournaments are expanded these days. We live in an age of a 24-team European Championship and now a 48-team World Cup. So you'd say, well, yes, the big team should always qualify, and invariably they do, albeit Italy would be an example of one big nation that has struggled. But it hasn't just been the fact that France have always qualified. They've always been contenders for outright victory, basically from Euro 2016 onwards. Won the World Cup in 2018, Euro 2020, bit of a blip, World Cup 20-finalists in 2022, and then semi-finalists Euro 2024, despite, as discussed earlier, playing absolutely horrendous football. And yeah, I think it can be tempting to think that this is the way that it has always been for France. It had never been like this for France previously, and lots of that is to do with the fact that they have some incredible players to call upon, and there is a depth of talent in France that you find in very few countries in the world, and that you have found in very few countries in the world in the history of football. But I think, you have to give Deschamps credit for creating that environment and creating that winning mentality, and doing all that without really having a signature style, not playing flamboyant football, but just doing enough to get the job done. And invariably, it's a job that's been done pretty successfully.
Yeah, I agree with most of that. And I'd certainly absolutely go along with, Deschamps' impact from 2012 to 2018, obviously, like when they win the World Cup. I would say I was probably among those kind of questioning after that if he was the right man to carry on. But he's had that ability, to take them to another World Cup final and very nearly win that. But I think the other asterisk, Andy, that we can put against Deschamps' reign is that France have not been very good to watch for the last few years. Even Tom, I think, used the word horrendous and possibly disgusting a little bit earlier when describing France's performances at the last Euros. And that has kind of gone at a time that's happened at a time where France have had more and more attacking talent at his disposal. Does his legacy depend a little bit on his ability to get them playing good football as well as winning football this summer?
No, I think his legacy is secure. He's a pragmatist and he's a winner. Didier Deschamps is a winner for all the reasons that you've just said. He as a player, he comes into a national team that didn't win and they start winning. And as a coach, the same thing happens. And okay, there have been periods over his 14 years where they've been less good, and the Euros 2 years ago was an example of that. But they still made the semi-finals when they were not in great shape. They still made it that far because they were actually brilliant defensively. I mean, obviously the bad attack gets a lot of the attention, but they were actually so good defensively, and that's what carried them there. And that is legitimate. That's a way to do well at football. Football is about winning first and foremost. I think that's a fine line, because if you don't win, then suddenly there's nothing left. But as a fan of my team, I want us to win. And Didier Deschamps delivers teams that generally tend to win. And, he's had that little spell coming into the World Cup in 2022 in Qatar. There were doubts about him. There were doubts about the team. And he did some, what he did with Antoine Griezmann at the last World Cup was a sensational piece of management. I don't think they were bad to watch at the 2022 World Cup. I thought they were really good. I thought the way they played against England in the quarterfinal, for example, when they had to kind of ride a storm, was fantastic. And he gets
the way,
the best.
You mean the way he wheeled Harry Kane's penalty over the crossbar? That was
exactly
fantastic management. But that's actually what they say about Deschamps. Lucky, like they call they talk about his luck.
Yeah. Exactly. And there are plenty of examples that down the years. But I just think his man management is obviously incredible. And Griezmann at the 2022 World Cup is an example of that. There are plenty of other examples. I think his legacy is intact. I think that the one question might be, I think going into the last couple of major tournaments, we've sort of thought, well, has he, should he have left after this tournament, or is this one tournament too far? The dangers, you don't want him to become like Joachim Löw, who probably did stay too long with the Germans, and then they began to kind of go on the downward trajectory when he was still there. But I think it'd have to go pretty badly for France at the World Cup for people to be saying that about him. Zidane has been waiting in the wings for a while. Zidane is, we'll see when it comes to him, but ultimately he's, his way of management is not necessarily about one specific thing. He just has an aura to him. Deschamps has that too, and that ultimately has driven France to the heights that they've reached over the years of his tenure. So no, I mean, listen, he's got an incredible record. You can't argue with it, and I think whatever happens in the US, barring a disaster, his legacy is safe.
I absolutely agree, and I'm like hugely sort of admiring and respectful of Didier Deschamps as a manager and as a person. Yeah. I mean, like I don't know him intimately, but spoken to him, a few times. You just see that kind of intensity. Like you say, for him, it's all about winning. It doesn't matter how you get there or what you have to do. If he has to protect a player, if he has to pick somebody who's not as good as another player, but it will, contribute to the team harmony, he will do that. He doesn't care what people say. And when you've won as much as he's won, you can do that. You don't have to justify anything to anybody, and that's been a big strength. I'm going to ask you, Tom, what sort of traits you sort of think are key to Deschamps' personality. One thing that stuck with me, I was following PSG closely, obviously, when Mbappe joined the club. Am I getting this right? Yeah, correct. So in 2017, 2018, when he was playing with Neymar and Cavani, and there was all sorts of questions already about whether he was getting too big for his boots and whether he needs to be sort of tracking back or playing more for the team. And what Deschamps did with Mbappe in that tournament was incredible. And it showed that Deschamps has the ability and the aura and the charisma to put a young lad like that in his place, which he basically did in the first game against Australia, where France really struggled and didn't really work out very well for Mbappe. And we saw on that documentary in particular with TF1, where Deschamps was having a debrief with the players, and he singled out Mbappe, saying, who's done the least sprints or something like that, and it turned out it was only Mbappe, and he was like, that's not good enough. You're supposed to be a quick player. Why are you not doing any sprinting for me? And I think he got the best out of Mbappe through that brilliant man management. And I think, Andy, you mentioned it, but I think that ability just to sense what a player needs to boost him is one of the main strengths. I don't know what you think, Tom.
Yeah, I think Deschamps' main achievement has been the creation of this culture of winning, and a culture that isn't dependent on a particular style of football, that isn't dependent on the same players always being available. As a pragmatist, he is always just looking for little advantages that he can find. He went into the 2018 World Cup thinking he was going to play one way with one tactical configuration, ditched it after the first game, and by the time of the second game, he'd found the winning formula. And that's something that he's done throughout his career. And I think it's a culture in which players feel secure. He doesn't baffle them with complicated tactics. I mean, we know that his tactics when it comes to attacking football are pretty basic. It is all about creating a very solid foundation, and the attacking players are then just given the freedom to do their own thing. We saw the limitations of that at Euro 2024. If players' individual ability isn't enough to open the door in opposition defences, France tactically don't propose conundrums that are impossible to solve. It's basically left the attacking players to figure it out themselves. The great fortune that Deschamps has had pretty much throughout his tenure as France coach is that he's had players who are talented enough that they are able to make those differences. But you go back to the 2018 World Cup, and there was criticism of the quality of France's football during that tournament, and even subsequently. And I think in France, there has always been a degree of snobbery towards football in France. It's less so these days because France is such a successful national team. But I think because of that, there was a feeling that it wasn't just enough to win. France needed to play with a certain swagger. And I think that's why the Platini team of the mid-'80s was so popular. This France wins in a different way. And yet, in spite of that, because of the memory of that, the mid-'80s team, the Michel Hidalgo team, the poor quality of France's football is sometimes used as a stick to beat them with. And the players who won the World Cup in 2018, they spoke about this quite a lot. And then there's a quote from Samuel Umtiti who said, we went into that tournament thinking we were going to play better football, but we realized it just didn't suit us. And the more the tournament went on, the more we realized how well suited we were at playing defensively solid, backs to the wall, counter-attacking football, score on a counter-attack, score from a set piece. And we really enjoyed that. And that became the team's identity. And to an extent, it remains the team's identity. I think what's interesting about what's happening at the moment with this new drive to fit more attacking players into the team, you wonder what that might mean for the defensive solidity that has been the main calling card for Deschamps. But I think, generally speaking, when you look at his tenure, just overall, that knowledge that France can let the opposition have the ball and still feel secure. I think that has been a massive part of their success. And I think that's something that is now, feels a very fundamental part of the team's DNA.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point what you say about the way Deschamps has changed the culture around the French national team, and he's always said there's nothing higher than the French national team. That is the summit of your football career, and that's obviously what he felt really strongly as a player and now as a coach. And I think if anybody does anything to damage that, he won't pick them. And we've seen there are some terrific players who just don't really get a look in under Deschamps, and it's been the case through the years. Just to finish, Andy, is the one concern is it that there might be too many talents and too many egos? That was a problem, has been a problem in the past, not so much under Deschamps, but it's a new generation now. The Barcolas, the Doués, Cliouche. I'm not necessarily trying to pick out the big heads, but they're certainly big talents, and they're going to want to be playing. There's a lot of players for not that very many places.
Well, I suppose the best example of a brilliant footballer who had an awkward relationship with Deschamps was obviously Karim Benzema. There are guys who are brilliant players who don't fit in, but ultimately when he keeps winning, none of that matters. And I think we've seen there have been a couple of examples of players recently who've not been in squads, and you sort of wonder, like, why does he never turn to them? And you wonder if it's to do with the relationship that he has with them. There's no indication, though, that things are all going to fall apart, because, he clearly knows the importance of keeping Mbappe on side, keeping Mbappe happy. Everyone in France knows that. He's not going to fall out with the guys he really has to keep on side, and everyone else is aware that Deschamps is the boss. That's not going to change. And then obviously, clearly, this is going to be a thing they're going to try to continue with the next manager. If it is the man we expect it to be, it'll be all about the aura that he has, because that counts for so much in international football too, as well, especially a big nation like France. You don't get the time to work on shape and tactics as much in international football. You just need to have somebody who the players will look up to, want to do a job for, who get it. And there's no better example than the man who captained them to the World Cup for the first time in 1998, won it with them as a coach again in 2018. So I don't think any guy who doesn't want to play, any player who doesn't want to play for this guy, is perhaps not somebody you desperately want in your team anyway. And I don't think that's going to be an issue for this World Cup. No.
You mentioned Benzema, like another player he was never on Benzema's level, but was a very, very good attacker, was Lacazette, who kind of for many years just wouldn't get a look in. And if there's a player at the moment, I'd say another Lyon player, Tolisso, who I think on talent and performances this season should be in that France squad.
But where does he fit into the squad? I think he is. I think Corentin Tolisso is a great player, but I think we've just talked earlier about the amount of quality, the number of attacking players in that front four, and the midfield two. If it's to be midfield two, if you've got Tchouaméni and Manu Kone, but you also have N'Golo Kanté, Warren Zaïre-Emery, Rabiot. There are players who can do that job already, and it's a question of, do you really need Corentin Tolisso? Most countries would, but maybe France just don't need him, and that's really unfortunate. Yeah.
Maybe, but I think and I'm not saying he's been a troublemaker or anything like that, but Deschamps knows him well enough, and for whatever reason, hasn't opened the door to him. And I think he's a better player than some of those guys that you named. Maybe not all of them, but N'Golo Kanté is probably not in his prime at the moment. Guendouzi has not been getting in recently, but he's certainly a player who I would not have above Tolisso. Anyway, we could go on and have this discussion, but time has run out. But it's been great chatting, guys, and I've enjoyed it. We're going to get back into the thick of the Ligue 1 action again next week. But before we go, we have a little announcement from Tom Williams, who is holding up something very proudly to the camera.
Oh, sorry.
What's that, Tom?
Was I being really obvious about that? Was I still on camera? Va-Va-Voom, The Modern History of French Football, is out now or will be out soon in paperback. Hits the shelves on April the 9th. Good to get this kind of practice out of the way. And you can order your copy from all good bookstores. And some
Va-Va-Voom, which I can tell you the original is a great read. So the updated version must be amazing, and
even better if you've got slightly weak arms, you'll find this a lot easier because it's a paperback.
It's probably a bit cheaper as well, isn't it?
It is
probably.
Multiple
Thank
reasons.
You, Tom.
Multiple reasons to buy it.
Brilliant. Oh, I encourage everybody to go out and get Va-Va-Voom if they haven't yet read it. But it's been a pleasure, as ever, to have Tom Williams and Andy Scott on the French Football Show. And, of course, we are very grateful to you guys for tuning in and spreading the word. Thank you once again. We'll be back with Ligue 1 chat in particular next week. Until then, bye-bye.